Trophy Reviews, back with another double bill Hong Kong review for Johnnie To, the man, the myth, the legend. And this one is going to be a bit of a special video because I figured both of these films are available on UK Netflix, and I think it'd be a really fun opportunity to check out both of these films, which I don't have access to on DVD or Blu-ray. And in fact, the three Johnnie To films are actually on Netflix UK right now, which is Blind Detective, which we have Life Without Principle, and we have the third film, which is Don't Go Breaking My Heart, which is a romantic comedy. Now that I will be reviewing in a separate video at some point with part 2, I believe, because I think it is a part 1, part 2 kind of, romantic comedy. So I'll do it as a separate video. But all three of these films are available on UK Netflix right now to watch. And being both of these films are more mainstream kind of Johnnie To films, being these are kind of like more kind of modern ones kind of thing compared to other ones I've been seeing from like the 90s, early 2000s. We're getting all the way up to 2013 now with some of the more later Johnnie To films. And I wanted to see what the quality was like, what the performances, what the stories. Can Johnnie To still keep that magic going within his movie making? So without further ado, let's dive into both Blind Detective and Life Without Principle.
真相可能唔係咁容易接受喎，真係要查。係。
First up on the streaming service, we have Blind Detective, released in 2013, directed by Johnnie To singly, no directing kind of sharing duties this time around. And we have Andy Lau as our main leading character, and we have Sammy Chang as our kind of co-character, co-supporting character, but essentially the love interest and essentially a main character as well within the film, kind of a dual kind of sharing screen kind of thing between these two characters, being in fact the story and the kind of themes that go around them. And this is a really fun, really wacky, really strange, tonally inconsistent film, but surprisingly does work for the most part. This essentially is exactly what it says. It's a blind detective. It's Andy Lau's character, who's our main leading character, and he's playing someone who is very, very smart. He's a very, very good detective. He's someone who is got blind from an incident that happened within an old case, and he is kind of using his senses, using his kind of wits and kind of his mindset kind of thing, a bit like a Sherlock Holmes type of thing, where he goes into his kind of mindscape. In fact, he's blind and he can't see. He has to rely on the people around him. He has to rely on kind of like his own kind of mind, how it works and how he sees things, and he has a very specific way of doing things, and he has to reenact a lot of the sequences to kind of get an understanding of the character's emotions, the character's kind of feelings, and it kind of plays into that idea of kind of mad detective and running on karma, which I've also reviewed on the channel, similar to those types of films, and how kind of specific characters use their kind of skill sets to kind of crack the case. And throughout the film, there's many sequences where he's kind of reenacting a lot of the kind of scenarios, the kind of the emotional state a lot of these kind of victims have gone through, and tries to reenact the sequences and try and catch some bad guys. We get a couple of early examples of this with a few small cases, and we get an idea of how his kind of mindscape sort of works and how he approaches the kind of scenes. And the film also is a bit of an odd kind of comedy. It's a bit of like a Chubby Chase kind of flex kind of thing, where he's just kind of likes to eat kind of real outlandish foods. He loves his suits kind of thing. He's definitely like a food hoarder. He likes to, have a sense of, people's sort of, aura and presence around him. He's very funny. He's quite aggressive in places as well. He's a bit kind of all over the place in terms of who he is. He's definitely someone who's gone through quite a bit, and someone who is wants to fall in love with this woman that he's kind of known since before he lost his sight, this kind of ballerina kind of dancer. So that's a bit of a kind of a personal motivation for him. He kind of joins forces with this kind of rookie kind of young detective, who's someone who wants to prove herself, someone who has a very personal kind of case from the 90s that it was unresolved. A character went missing called Millie, which has a connection to her. She herself is someone who is surprisingly quite wealthy. She joined the police force because she basically didn't get any kind of unresolved answers, in the sense that she sort of felt very guilty of that, the fact that she went missing and potentially taken by a serial killer potentially, and she joined the police force because of it. And she is surprisingly very wealthy, which makes a lot of sense within the film. It works quite well within the film because some of the most outlandish stuff, some of the most kind of recreations and crazy kind of scenarios, and obviously the food he's having constantly within the location, hopping around the film, makes a lot of sense. You have like a character which is so rich and wealthy because it's very expensive, it's a very expensive taste, and a lot of these sequences are very, very expensive that no ordinary cop or detective will be able to afford or do, which makes perfect sense. Like, she has a very personal angle in that regard, and she sort of kind of admires and kind of falls in love with Andy Lau's character throughout the process of the film, being the fact that he's so brilliant, and he has more the street smarts, he has more the kind of the intellect, and he can determine a location, and he has very much like a Will Graham kind of Hannibal kind of thing going on, where he kind of is speaking to the victims in terms of reading the files. The more he knows their emotional state, the more he knows about the case, the more he knows about the time, was it raining, what was she sad, was she depressed, and there's a really brilliant sequences throughout the entire film where he kind of recreating this in his mind while recreating it in real life at the same time as well. But he sort of talks to the victims in his head, which is really, really cool. It very much reminds me of Mad Detective in that regard. It's very much a kind of a nod to that a little bit in that regard. But her character is very much martial arts kind of heavy. She's fun as well, and she definitely has a really good kind of back and forth kind of relationship between Andy Lau's character and her, and she definitely is falling in love with him, and she's admiring his brilliance in a sense, even though he's a bit kind of rude and a bit obnoxious at times, and there's some weird kind of odd kind of tonal shifts that happen throughout the film in terms of going for full-blown silly slapstick comedy with the walking cane, and some of the things he tries to do, some of the fights he tries to do isn't, and then versus nasty kind of child molesting, murdering kind of scenarios, and recreation of kind of bloody murders and stabbing and knife crimes and stuff. It's pretty weird in terms of its kind of tone. The chemistry between our two main actors are absolutely brilliant in the film, and they are really a fun kind of like will they kind of get together type of kind of scenario, but their personal relationship and their kind of professional relationship all leads into each other very well, and it definitely gets to some pretty intense moments for sure. Surprise. Overall, Blind Detective is definitely more of a mainstream kind of Johnnie To film. It definitely is appealing a lot more to the kind of the mass kind of crowd, and it's trying to add in things to appeal to everyone that wants to watch a film like this. But I think he does a really good job of just about getting that kind of the thriller aspect of it, which is very interesting, very well told, and it's very fun to kind of see that kind of storyline play out. And the comedy element is definitely hit and miss, with some slapstick humor and some very much kind of a mean-spirited humor in place as well. But there is some genuinely good comedy moments and fun moments throughout the film, which is surprisingly quite well handled, and it works quite well within the story. And absolutely recommend watching this one, guys, on Netflix UK. It's surprisingly quite fun.
他们主要是投资一些国家的房地产，风险高，投资利润相对高一点咯。
没有不贪心的，全都想不劳而获，以小博大。
尽管我不想死。
And lastly, for the video, we have Life Without Principle, released in 2011, directed by Johnnie To. And this film is surprising. This film is not the film that I thought it was going to be. The poster doesn't really going to give it justice. I think the type of film we're trying to go for is not the film you would expect going in, knowing what the type of, the synopsis and the kind of the scenario. You think this is going to be a crazy kind of action thriller, but it's actually surprisingly not. This is more of a drama with kind of thriller elements throughout the kind of the late second into the third act of the film. It has moments of tensity and violence, but plays it in very different ways than I was expecting. And this is really, really good. I was actually quite blown away how surprisingly good this one was. And it's essentially three kind of storylines that kind of intertwine with each other, and it's done in a very kind of unconventional kind of way within its kind of structure. It's about an hour and 40-minute movie, and this is essentially Johnnie To's kind of take on the 2008 kind of housing crisis, the kind of the stock market kind of crash, and how this affects different people within different forms of life. You have essentially a banker, you have a gangster kind of thief character, and you have a cop, and there's a lot of supporting characters around them, and three different perspectives in that kind of time, that place, dealing with the scenarios that the film takes place in within this kind of idea of the stock market crash, and how people are trying to make money, and how people are losing money, and the consequences, and how people are approaching it, how people are trying to get rich, and some people are losing money throughout the place. And this is essentially Johnnie To's The Big Short, which, if you've seen that film, is absolutely brilliant. I love watching The Big Short. It's a film that I kind of just keep on coming back to. Something about those types of movies and those types of, even though I'm not kind of like the most in tune with the stock market and housing crisis and that kind of film, but I love dramas. I love kind of really kind of real, based on true stories, and how something can get to such an extreme kind of crazy kind of point within, you know, our life and a time and a place where people are vulnerable, people are scared for their kind of their situation, and they're trying to make more money, or they're trying to, you know, play the stocks, and they're trying to get a house or mortgage in a sense. And it's very human kind of problems, very much human relatable problems, and this film deals with that concept within 3 different types of people, and it's really well handled. I would say mad props to Johnnie To for making a good portion of the film, because I swear an hour of this film is dedicated to one main character, and basically through that main character, which is our banker, which is a woman basically who is last on this kind of, you know, selling this kind of new trust fund, this kind of, you know, world order trust fund, which is a corporation of like India and China and UK and US kind of thing. And it's just very much a con job essentially. You know, you got to hit a target, you got to do like 10 million or 10 million plus. You got to sell this package, and you got to get people that are rich essentially, or have money to do it, to invest in this kind of, you know, stock. And you know, it looks good for them in the sense of the bank, it looks good for the actual member, the actual kind of banking clock, and she is last in her kind of team, and you know, she's only done a few sales here and there, where the others have done really much more aggressive and done better, and they're kind of getting the pat on the back, and she feels very isolated. And it's just about a good portion of the first portion of the film is about her, and through that character we get a lot of good setup, and we get an idea of what the film is trying to go for, and through her we get a lot of interchangeable characters that come later on within the second and third act of the film, which is very smart, very clever of Johnnie To to make a good portion of the film essentially this, you know, sitting down on a desk talking about stock and talking about, you know, rates going up and down. You know, if any other film would be very boring and very kind of, you know, takes you out, or was like, where's this film going? But I was quite engaged throughout the entire thing, and I was just like constant like, where's this going? I'm very intrigued, and it's so well presented, and it's so intense in a very different type of way. Just the fact that, you know, her character is a bit lying. She's someone who is a bit more kind of kind-hearted and a bit more nicer. She's, you know, essentially duping this kind of old woman into kind of sacrificing her millions into this kind of trust fund, you know, scheme kind of thing, which is high risk, and she knows that she's not going to really make any money, and there's no guarantees or anything, you know. And it's this idea of like, you know, all these bank clerks and all these kind of, you know, bankers don't really know what they're talking about. You know, they're not, you know, putting the customer, you know, at first as a priority. It's about making them look good, making their investors look good. And she's very, and the good portion of the second act of the film leading into the third act is the thriller aspect, which is more the kind of the gangsters kind of perspective. And we have Lan Ching Wong, which is a, you know, Wong Kar-wai regular, someone who is very loyal, someone who is very nice yet again to the cause. And you know, he's a sworn brother. He's like, you know, he's happy to help anyone, and he puts everyone else at first. He doesn't cheat, he doesn't take off the top. He's not really well smart. He's similar to kind of Oz as a general kind of character, someone who doesn't really understand the stock market, and he has to get into a series of scenarios and helping people out, and he eventually does have to play the market, and he does manage to get money, and a character's in danger because of the stock market crash so severely, and a lot of money's been lost on it. That's really intense and really fun, and that leads into some other characters like the loan shark character we get, which is constantly bragging, and who's someone who's very wealthy as well. He's constantly making a high percentage of people kind of borrowing money off him in the sense, which is quite funny. So there's a really good intertwinable kind of characters. All 3 of these kind of characters come in, and it's just a really well handled movie. There's not really huge much else to really say apart from that. If you're interested in something like The Big Short in terms of stock market crash and how it affects the kind of people, if you want a pretty reasonable, pretty intense kind of thriller moments throughout the entire film, if you want tension within just kind of dialogue and good kind of storytelling, good performances and back and forth, and that kind of like that tensity of, you know, something's not right here, something's not wrong, you know, something's very wrong, and how desperate these characters become, especially some of the supporting characters, you know, paying their mortgage or robbing people. Johnnie To is definitely the master of this type of stuff, and he manages to create a really intense movie through different forms of action throughout it, whether it's the thriller aspect, whether it's just conversation back and forth in terms of performances, down to the innocent kind of bystanders, civilians, even just people that are basically wanting to kill themselves because of the scenario they're in, because of the situation they're in, because of, you know, not paying rent or everything's going up and there's no returns back in the sense. Everyone is very greedy. And the way the film ends also, I think, is quite good as well. Actually, I think it was quite nice how the film ends, and you know, the 2 kind of characters that we like the most and had the most screen time and had the most kind of, you know, in the thick of it in a sense, you know, manages to managed to get a pretty good ending overall in a sense, and I quite appreciate. Life Without Principle is definitely a very unique type of film. It's definitely very different for Johnnie To tackle, and it's something that, again, just another slice of what Johnnie To's kind of magic is in a sense. You know, he's great storytelling. You know, it has great kind of locations, great performances, really good and kind of real kind of, you know, down to earth kind of, you know, situation that these characters are in, and it's a really well told film. It's just a really well handled movie that knows how to do great action, great kind of thriller, intense moments, but also manages to balance that kind of range of intensity throughout different forms of these kind of three storylines, and it's very well handled. It's very much, it all comes together quite nicely by the end. This is definitely something I definitely would own on Blu-ray and on the collection. If you like The Big Short, if you like those types of true life kind of based kind of movies, absolutely recommend Johnnie To's Life Without Principle. I think you're going to be in for quite a surprise for sure. So there you go, guys. Been my thoughts and opinions on Blind Detective and Life Without Principle. Both available on UK Netflix right now, guys. Go and check it out while you still can. I don't think these films are available on DVD or Blu-ray very easily, very hard to track down. So go and check them out while you have the opportunity. And I will be talking about the Don't Go Breaking My Heart, probably part 1, part 2 in a separate video down the line for sure. Hopefully that's something, Johnnie To's romantic comedy, mainstream comedy. Let's see. So what are your thoughts and opinions on both films, guys? Please comment down below. So in the meantime, Amphlett Reviews, signing out.